On July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong stepped out of an odd-looking spaceship and into the pages of history as the first man on the moon. Today, he remains one of the most famous people on the planet, but he's also famously private. For years, Armstrong has shunned the media and the limelight, but now he's about to take a giant leap back into the public view. He's finally authorized a biography entitled First Man, written by James Hansen. And for the first time, he's agreed to a television profile.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
Oh, boy.
Walter Cronkite captured the moment.
Building shaking. What a moment. Man on the way to the moon.
What did it feel like?
It felt like a train on a bad railroad track and shaking in every direction. And it was loud, really loud.
Neil Armstrong is 75 now, an aging hero, but his winning smile is still there. We remember him as the cool and confident commander of Apollo 11, joined by his crewmates Buzz Aldrin and Michael Collins. On a windswept day, we went with Armstrong to an old Apollo launch pad at Kennedy Space Center to hear the story of one of man's greatest adventures. That July morning in 1969, when you came out and you gave that thumbs up, that was a very confident view you put on.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a sham, I admit. You know, the reality is a lot of times you get up there and get in the cockpit and something goes wrong somewhere and you go back down. So actually, when you actually lift off, it's really a big surprise.
Perched atop a Saturn V rocket, they were on their way to meet the challenge President Kennedy made 8 years earlier.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
It took 400,000 workers and $24 billion, intended in large part to prove American superiority over the Soviets. There was a lot riding on that mission, wasn't there? It was the hopes of a nation riding on that mission.
It was indeed. We wanted to do well. Even more than that, you hope that you as a person don't make any mistakes.
And he didn't. Armstrong's entire life had prepared him well, starting with a childhood fascination with flight. He earned his pilot's license at 16 before he learned to drive. By 21, he was flying combat missions over Korea. After the war, he became a hotshot test pilot, flying the famous X-15 at 4,000 miles an hour to the edge of the atmosphere. It was during that time in 1962 when he faced his most difficult test, losing his 2-year-old daughter Karen to brain cancer. Did that affect your work at that time? Some people, when they're hit with a tragedy like that, they pour themselves into the work.
Yeah. It's difficult for me to know. I thought the best thing for me to do in that situation was to continue with my work, keep things as normal as I could, and try as hard as I could not to have it affect my ability to do useful things.
But that's not an easy thing to do. How do you think you did?
At the time, I thought the family was handling it well, and I was doing the best I could.
You never quite recover from the death of a child. In that same year of grief, Armstrong was chosen to be an astronaut. He flew his first space mission in 1966 on Gemini 8 and nearly lost his life when his tiny capsule briefly spun out of control. He cheated death again 2 years later while flying an experimental device designed to simulate a lunar landing. When it malfunctioned, Armstrong was sitting at the controls. He ejected barely 100 feet from the ground. And if you didn't get out, that would have been your life.
Yeah, probably would have.
Yet somebody told me that after that happened, when it was all over, you went back to your office and sat down to do paperwork.
That's true. I did. There was work to be done.
Wait a minute. You were just almost killed.
Well, but I wasn't.
Armstrong stood out, even among a class of astronauts that had the right stuff. His depth of experience and nerves of steel earned him at age 38 the command of Apollo 11. The trip to the moon took 4 days. After achieving lunar orbit, Michael Collins would remain in the command module, while Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin climbed into the lunar module, undocked, and began their descent.
00764.
But the landing took an unexpected turn. The onboard guidance system was sending Armstrong and Aldrin right towards disaster.
Our autopilot was taking us into a very large crater, about the size of a big football stadium, with steep slopes on the crater covered with very large rocks about the size of automobiles. That was not the kind of place I wanted to try to make the first landing.
Armstrong overrode the autopilot and looked for a safe place to land. But the detour cost them precious fuel, and they were about to run out.
200 feet, 4.5 down.
A worldwide television audience of nearly 1 billion people was on the edge of their seats. And so was CBS's own Walter Cronkite. We couldn't resist reuniting the former anchorman with the former spaceman. There are things they can laugh about now, but at the time, those final seconds were almost unbearable.
We were following the flight plan, and we suddenly realized that he'd made a detour, and we didn't know how long that detour was going to be. Yes, I was very much concerned. I think all of us who were following the flight that closely were scared to death. If he wasn't, we were.
40 feet down, 2.5, picking up some dust.
The Eagle closed in on the moon.
Houston,
And then this.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
Oh, boy. Boy.
Okay, we're going to be busy for a minute.
Walter was breathing again, too, but barely.
You are a man who I've known for years never to be at a loss for words. But you were at a loss for words then. I think all you could come up with was, oh, boy.
Turned out I didn't have anything to say at all, except, wow, oh, boy, oh, boy. Perfectly speechless.
The ghostly image was beyond words. Armstrong paused on the bottom rung of the ladder
I'm going to step off the limb.
and planted his left boot on the lunar dust.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Do you recall how you came up with that? A small step for a man. What was the inspiration for it?
Well, I thought, well, when I step off, it's just going to be a little step. It's going to be a step from there down to there. But then I thought about all those 400,000 people that had given me the opportunity to make that step, and thought, well, it's going to be a big something for all those folks, and indeed a lot of others that even weren't involved in the project. So it was a kind of a simple correlation of thoughts.
The pictures that came back were quite remarkable. What did it look like to you, to your naked eye?
It's a brilliant surface in that sunlight. The horizon seems quite close to you because the curvature is so much more pronounced than here on Earth. It's an interesting place to be. I recommend it.
You got something? Magnificent flight out here. Magnificent desolation.
Armstrong and Aldrin spent just a short time on the lunar surface, testing the gravity, completing a long list of experiments, and marking their journey. They had come in peace for all mankind, but stayed less than a day.
God bless you. Good night from Apollo 11.
The hard part was re-entry. They returned to Earth superstars. In New York, 4 million people showered them with ticker tape. On a 45-day victory lap around the world, they were met by crowds in the Congo and by the Queen at Buckingham Palace. But as Armstrong reveals in his new biography, published by our sister company, Simon & Schuster, he was unprepared for his sudden celebrity and found it to be both a blessing and a burden.
Friends and colleagues all of a sudden looked at us, treated us slightly differently than they had months or years before when we were working together. I never quite understood that.
You said once to a reporter, how long must it take before I cease to be known as a spaceman? Why did you make that comment?
I guess we all like to be recognized not for one piece of fireworks, but for the ledger of our daily work.
Strolling around the Ohio farm where he was born, Armstrong is easy to talk to but hard to know. He can seem guarded, but above all, we were struck by his humility.
You sometimes seem uncomfortable with your celebrity, that you'd rather not have all of this attention.
No, I just don't deserve it.
But look, how many people have walked on the moon? 12? Mm-hmm. You were the first. You were chosen to do that. That's special.
Yeah, I wasn't chosen to be first. I was just chosen to command that flight. Circumstance put me in that particular role. That wasn't planned by anyone.
After Apollo 11, Armstrong hung up his spacesuit and never felt the need for an encore. For 8 years, he taught engineering at the University of Cincinnati, surely their only professor who'd walked on the moon.
In the midst of all your professional achievements, you managed to get married, to have a family. Was it a difficult balance for you to maintain, both sides of your life?
The one thing I regret was that my work required an enormous amount of my time and a lot of travel, and I didn't get to spend the time I would have liked with my family as they were growing up.
Armstrong has 2 sons with his wife of 38 years, Janet, who divorced him in 1994. He remarried several years ago. In the autumn of his life, he lives very much in the present, refusing to let his famous deed define him. He's made a comfortable living serving on corporate boards, but even in retirement, he keeps a watchful eye on the space program and would like to see it restored to its glory days.
Did you ever imagine that 5 years after first going to the moon that we'd abandon the Apollo program?
I knew we would have a limited life, but I must say it was a bit shorter than my expectation. I fully expected that by the end of the century, we would have achieved substantially more than we actually did.
And why do you think we didn't?
When we lost the competition, we lost the public will to continue.
Very good.
The man who once rode a 160 million horsepower rocket now flies this, a plane with no engine. If you're wondering how Neil Armstrong gets his thrills today, just watch.
Gliders, sailplanes, they're wonderful flying machines. It's the closest you can come to being a bird.
What do you get out of gliding?
Self-satisfaction, a sense of accomplishment, trying to do a little better than you think you possibly can.
NASA recently announced plans to send men back to the moon by the year 2018 and later to Mars. Don't think Neil Armstrong hasn't noticed.
You said you'd like to see us go back to the moon and then go on to Mars. Something you want to do at this point in your life?
I don't think I'm going to get the chance, but I don't want to say I'm not available.
What was the most spectacular sight on the Apollo flight?
You know, every sight in space is spectacular. I mean, you just can never look out the window without being amazed at what you see. And I hope that technology will allow more and more people to go and see those sights and see our planet. It's a beautiful place, particularly when you see it from a distance. It's a magnificent sight. But the most beautiful sight, as we were approaching the moon, and I'd say maybe we're 5,000 to 7,000 miles out, pretty close, we flew into the moon's shadow, which means that from our point of view, the moon was eclipsing the sun. So we would see the It's a dark gray moon, and behind it, the corona of the sun coming out all around. It was a lovely sight. And now we were close enough that the moon wasn't a disk as we see it from here on Earth. It looks pretty flat to us from here. But it was clearly three-dimensional, a ball, and it was covered with ridges and craters and valleys and hills and all manner of, and that was decidedly, it was in the dark, but it was being illuminated by the light of Earth. Now, because Earth is, as you know, 16 times bigger in area than the moon, and it's also more reflective. So consequently, it's substantial. Earthlight is substantially brighter than moonlight at the same distance. And because of the oceans, that light is decidedly blue. Light is blue. So we were looking at this three-dimensional ball with all these valleys and ridges and craters and things. We're falling. It was illuminated by blue Earth light, and we were flying toward it faster and falling faster and getting closer and getting faster. I thought it was the most beautiful sight I'd ever seen.
Clinging on.
Now, you can't sit in any kind of a machine and accelerate 7,000 or 8,000 miles an hour without you suspecting that something's going on. But you see, it was at night. We were on the night side of the Earth over Africa, and we couldn't see, and you just couldn't get an appreciation of what it was that was happening. But as we came out into daylight over Indonesia, we could see, and it was spectacular. We were ascending from the Earth at a rate of, something like going outward at 5,000 miles an hour or 7,000 miles an hour, something like that. But from our point of view, we just seemed like we were motionless, and the Earth was sinking away from us. And we could see more and more of the horizon, the Pacific out there, the Gulf, the Indian Ocean, Malaysia. All of a sudden, we could see the whole sphere, a great, gigantic blue ball covered with a white lace of clouds. And it was just sinking further and further away, sort of into that inky black sky. Well, I said to myself, boy, this time you might have just gone and done it.
In regards to the computer, we were chatting about this. On the actual Apollo, the landing module, the whole process, how powerful a computer did you have? How, in today's terminology, how powerful would you say it was?
Well, it was not as good as a laptop, but it was probably a little better than a handheld. It actually had, some of you that are computer nerds,
he's a pilot. He's not a nerd.
You got to have gigs and that kind of stuff. And we didn't have gigs or even megs. The Apollo computer had 32K of fixed memory and 2K of erasable. That was it. No screen, no sound, no icons, no nothing. And the keyboard just had, it had 0 through 10, read, clear, and enter. I think it might have been 1 or 2 more keys. We had no graphics, no screen, no. On its best days, it couldn't get to 1 megahertz. So it was slow and weak, but it got its there.
Yeah, baby. Hey, Matt. Yeah. One last one from me. I got a question for me. There's one thing I want to know. There's one thing I want to know since the day you agreed to come. And as I mentioned to you, we live on a house, top of a hill, and we get so many great views of the sky at night. And here's the question that's just been, every time I go home and I see the moon, this is the question I've been wanting to ask you. It's a crystal clear November evening, little nip in the air. It's just as clear as can be. And you're driving home, and you get out of your car, and you look up. Like that. And you see this image like this, okay? What comes to your mind? What jumps to your mind?
Girls. Let me back up a little bit to the Apollo goal, which you all talked about earlier in the day and so on. The nice thing about that goal was that it was so simple and understandable. Send a man to the moon, return him safely to Earth by the end of the decade. I mean, everything you needed to know was there. And I think it's a great advantage when goals can be stated in such a way that they're not ambiguous and you know exactly what it is you're trying to do. And that was a model for me. I've never been as good at doing that for myself as Jack Kennedy did for our program. But the important thing to me, and I think probably to many here, is that you want to make a mark. You'd like to leave the world a little better than when you came. That's my goal. Well, hi, I'm Neil Armstrong. Join me for an adventure through time. Among the fastest and most dangerous racers to fly was the GB.
All 7 GBs crashed within 4 years, killing 5 pilots.
The airplane's built exactly as the original. It's a challenge. You need to pay attention every minute.
Arrived on the scene just in time to help wage the battle of Britain.
This malfunction seaplane reminds me of a small person with big muscles. At 450 miles, I just pull the boat straight up and pull it over. I think it's a fantastic machine.
Flying the mail was a battle not easily won. So when you mail that next letter, remember the sacrifices of those who made it possible. Join me again next time. First Flights. Hi, I'm Neil Armstrong. Join me for an adventure through time. The B-17 was a new concept, a self-sufficient fighting flying machine that bristled with weaponry and destroyed more enemy fighters than any other airplane. It lived up to its name, a flying fortress.
The heavily armed B-17 was not impregnable, but the men of the 8th Air Force continued their missions. Germany began to weaken from the round-the-clock attacks, but at great cost. During the worst of the campaign, as many as 200 planes a week were destroyed, representing the loss of 2,000 men. But if there was the slightest chance of survival, the B-17 could make it home. This B-17 is owned by World War II B-17 pilot David Talashay.
The X-15 was designed for hypersonic flight, 5 times the speed of sound and beyond, higher and faster than any other winged aircraft. And its flight tests would demonstrate that it was possible for a pilot to function in a weightless environment and fly a winged re-entry from space.
Well, we're here at the NASA installation at Edwards in the pilot's locker room with Bill Dana. Bill's a legendary test pilot. Bill, you flew the X-15 a lot of times. What were the sensations of getting dropped off that B-52 wing and lighting up the engine?
The Boeing B-52 still flies today. Neil Armstrong suited up and went along on a routine 7-hour mission.
Rotary wing aircraft are certainly a fascinating part of aviation. Join me again next time for First Flights. Hi, I'm Neil Armstrong. Join me for an adventure through time. From the earliest days, flyers have been pushing to fly faster and further. They soon began to believe that it just might be possible to fly completely around the Earth. This Douglas World Cruiser was the first to do it back in 1924.
The years after the first round-the-world flight saw a boom in long-distance records. Pilots vied with cross continents and oceans without stopping.
Flying all the way around the world and coming back to where you started is not a very practical thing to do.
You were worried?
Our own data showed that it was improbable that we would do it without a mechanical failure.
As turbine engines became lighter, a new breed of aircraft became possible. One that could take off and land vertically, yet fly with the speed of jets.
The fantail anti-torque system gives the aircraft unusual agility and maneuverability at airspeeds up to 80 knots. Neil spoke with Sergei Sikorsky about the early helicopters his father designed.
I remember very, very distinctly the first trainer that my father built, which was swiveled on a post. He used that to train himself on the controls of the machine, and then the first very brief hops.
In their quest for increased flight efficiencies, designers looked at radical new designs. Some thought the ideal shape would be just a wing, nothing else, flying through the air.
a very complex airplane. Two-man airplanes, they have to operate all of the basic airplane controls as well as the navigation and the weapon systems.
In the early days of aviation, instruments in the cockpit were simple, almost non-existent. A weighted silk stocking or scarf tied to a strut could help the pilot gauge his airspeed. That's about it. Thousands of pilots learned their instrument training in this link trainer in the 30s and 40s, and it was a challenge. Join us again next time on First Flight.